I threw a family party, no one showed up. That same day, my daughter-in-law posted pictures of everyone on a cruise. I just smiled. When they came back, I handed her a DNA test that made her go pale. On my 65th birthday, I decided, my son doesn't deserve that shrew. This isn't just a story about a birthday party no one showed up to. Oh no, it's about the day my entire world shattered, and I realized the woman my son married had systematically erased me from my own family, piece by agonizing piece. But what she didn't know was, she just picked a fight with the wrong grandmother. When I turned 65, I thought I'd be surrounded by the people I loved most. I'd spent 3 weeks planning that birthday party, you know? 3 weeks agonizing over the perfect menu, decorating the dining room with fresh flowers, calling everyone to confirm they'd be there. I even bought a new dress, navy blue with tiny pearl buttons, the kind Elliot, my son, always said made me look elegant. The table was set for 8. Place cards written in my best handwriting for Elliot, my sweet grandson Tommy, who had just turned 7, darling Emma, who was 5, my sister Ruth and her husband Carl, and of course me at the head of the table. I just wanted to see all their faces as we celebrated together. By 6:30 p.m., no one had arrived. I checked my phone 3 times, thinking I'd gotten the time wrong, but there it was in my calendar. Birthday dinner 6 p.m. I'd sent reminders 2 days before. At 7 o'clock I called Elliot straight to voicemail. Then Meadow's phone, his wife's. Same thing. Ruth didn't answer either, which was really strange because she always picks up on the second ring. I stood in my dining room, looking at those untouched plates. The candles I'd lit an hour ago now burned down to stumps. The roast was getting cold in the oven. The chocolate cake I'd spent all morning making sat perfect and uncut on the kitchen counter. Maybe there was traffic, I told myself, clutching at any excuse. Maybe something came up at the last minute. These things happen, I whispered, even though my chest felt tight and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. By 8 o'clock, the truth hit me with a sickening thud. They weren't coming. I sank heavily into my chair, staring at the empty seats around me. This wasn't just lateness. This was something else entirely. The silence in my house felt different now, not peaceful but hollow, like the house itself was holding its breath. And that's when I made the mistake of checking Facebook. There, at the top of my feed, was a photo that made my blood freeze. Meadow, absolutely radiant in a flowing white sundress, her arm around Elliot, who was grinning wider than I'd seen in months. Behind them, the deep blue of the ocean stretched endlessly. The caption read, "Living our best life on the Mediterranean. So grateful for this amazing family getaway." I scrolled down. More photos. Tommy and Emma building sandcastles on a pristine beach. Ruth and Carl sharing cocktails at what looked like an elegant ship's bar. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. The timestamp showed the photos were posted just an hour ago. While I was sitting here waiting for them, they were thousands of miles away, toasting with champagne and laughing at some sunset dinner on a cruise ship. Something cracked inside my chest. Not broke but cracked, like ice on a lake when the temperature drops too fast. They'd planned this. All of them. Meadow had organized a family vacation that deliberately excluded me, scheduled it for my birthday, and somehow convinced everyone to go along with it. Even Ruth, my own sister, who'd helped me pick out decorations for this party just last week. I stared at that photo until my eyes burned. Meadow's smile looked especially bright, almost triumphant. She was standing exactly where I should have been. At the center of my family, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me most. My phone buzzed. A text from Elliot. "Sorry, Mom. Forgot to mention we'd be out of town this week. Meadow booked a surprise trip. Happy birthday though. Forgot to mention." As if a Mediterranean cruise was something you just casually forgot to tell your mother about. As if booking it on my birthday was pure coincidence. I set the phone down carefully, afraid I might throw it against the wall if I held it any longer. The roast was definitely cold now. I walked to the kitchen and turned off the oven. My movements felt mechanical and strange. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, observing this sad woman in her navy blue dress, cleaning up the dinner no one came to eat. I wrapped the cake in plastic and put it in the refrigerator, blew out what remained of the candles, started loading the good china back into the cabinet, each plate clicking against the others with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet house. Meadow had won something tonight, though I wasn't entirely sure what game we'd been playing. All I knew was that for the first time in my 65 years I felt truly invisible. Not just overlooked or forgotten but erased. As I turned off the dining room lights, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked smaller, somehow diminished. The woman staring back at me had spent decades being the family peacekeeper. The one who smoothed over arguments, remembered everyone's birthdays, and always put family first. And they'd all chosen to spend my birthday pretending I didn't exist. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step heavier than the last. Tomorrow I'd have to face the aftermath, the fake apologies, the excuses about miscommunication, Meadow's sweet voice explaining how the trip was booked months ago, and there was nothing they could do. But tonight, I just needed to sit with this pain to really feel it, because something told me this wasn't just about a missed birthday party. This was about something much bigger, and much more deliberate than I'd ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through every family gathering from the past 5 years. That birthday wasn't just forgotten. It was deliberately sabotaged. And as the hours crept by, other memories started surfacing, each one more unsettling than the last. Tommy's 4th birthday party. I'd been so excited to see him blow out his candles. But when I arrived at the venue, Meadow met me at the door with that apologetic smile she'd perfected. "Oh, Loretta, didn't Elliot tell you? We had to move the party to tomorrow. Little emergency came up." But I could hear children laughing inside. I could see balloons through the window. When I called Elliot later, he seemed genuinely confused. "Tomorrow? No, Mom. The party's definitely today." Meadow must have mixed up the dates. Emma's first day of kindergarten. I'd asked Meadow 3 times what time they were dropping her off so I could be there with my camera. "Oh, we're doing it super early," she'd said. "Like 7 a.m. Probably too early for you." When I showed up anyway, the teacher told me Emma had been there since the normal time, 8:30. I'd missed her walking into her classroom, missed her nervous little wave goodbye to Elliot. Last Christmas, Meadow had called me 2 days before, her voice tight with false concern. "Loretta, I hate to do this, but Elliot's been feeling really overwhelmed with work stress. He asked if we could keep Christmas dinner small this year. Just immediate family." I'd spent Christmas alone, reheating leftovers and watching old movies. Later, I found out from Ruth that they'd had a huge celebration. She'd seen the photos on Instagram. 20 people, including Elliot's college friends and several neighbors. Everyone except me. Each memory felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place, forming a picture I'd been too blind to see. This wasn't a pattern of miscommunication or innocent scheduling conflicts. This was systematic, calculated. I got up and made coffee as the sun rose, my hands still trembling from exhaustion. And something else. A growing sense of dread. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through Meadow's social media posts from the past year, really looking at them for the first time. There she was at Tommy's school play, sitting in the front row next to Elliot. I'd asked about that play specifically, and she told me it was canceled due to a flu outbreak. There she was at Emma's dance recital, the one Meadow said was just a practice session, nothing special. Photo after photo of family moments I'd been excluded from, each one tagged with captions about precious family memories, and blessed to have these people in my life. The cruelest part was how natural it all looked. Meadow's arm around Elliot. The children clustered close to their parents. Everyone smiling like they belonged together. Like they were complete without me. I set the phone down and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden I planted when Elliot was a boy. He used to help me weed these flower beds, his small hands careful with the delicate stems. When had I lost him? When had he stopped seeing me as essential to his happiness? The answer came with startling clarity. When Meadow entered our lives. Before her, Elliot called me twice a week. We had standing dinner dates every other Sunday. He'd ask my advice about work problems, share stories about his day. He was my son, my friend, my connection to a future I'd helped create. Meadow changed that gradually. So slowly I didn't notice until it was too late. First, the Sunday dinners became monthly. Meadow's been planning these elaborate meals, Elliot explained. She loves having me all to herself on weekends. Then the phone calls dwindled to obligation check-ins on holidays. "Sorry, Mom, can't talk long. Meadow's got a schedule pretty tight today." She never said anything directly against me. That would have been too obvious, too easily countered. Instead, she operated in the spaces between words, in the silences that followed her suggestions. "Your mom seems tired lately. Maybe we shouldn't burden her with the kids this weekend." Or, "I saw your mom at the grocery store yesterday. She looked a little confused about something. Do you think she's doing okay living alone?" Subtle implications that I was becoming a burden, a concern, someone who needed managing rather than including. I thought about the way she hugged me at family gatherings, always a beat too long. Her hand rubbing my back like I was a fragile elderly relative who needed comforting rather than an equal member of the family. The way she'd interrupt when I was talking to the children, redirecting their attention to something else. "Grandma Loretta's had a long day, sweeties. Why don't you show Daddy your new toy instead?" And Elliot, my beautiful, trusting son, had absorbed it all without question. He'd started looking at me the way Meadow did, with a mixture of affection and pity, Like I was something precious but increasingly irrelevant. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Elliot's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, Mom." His voice was cheerful, relaxed in a way that made my chest ache. "Just wanted to call and say happy belated birthday. Sorry we missed it, but this trip has been incredible." Meadow really outdid herself with the planning. I gripped the phone tighter. "Yes, I saw the photos." "Oh good. Meadow's been posting like crazy. The kids are having such a blast. Tommy learned to snorkel yesterday, and Emma made friends with this little girl from Boston. You would have loved seeing them." "Would I?" Because from where I sat it seemed like no one had even noticed I wasn't there. "The trip was very last minute," I said carefully. "I know, right? Meadow found this amazing deal and just went for it. She's always been spontaneous like that. One of the things I love about her. Spontaneous. That's what he called deliberately booking a cruise on his mother's birthday. Elliot." I started then stopped. What could I say? That his wife was manipulating him? That she'd spent years systematically excluding me from his life? He'd think I was jealous, bitter, unable to accept that he'd grown up and moved on. Maybe I was all those things, but I was also right. "Everything okay, Mom? You sound off." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of all those lost moments, all those times I'd been edited out of my own family story. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." "Well, get some rest. We'll be back next week. And I promise we'll plan something special to make up for missing your birthday." Another promise from Elliot that Meadow would find a way to break. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the light change. As morning moved toward afternoon, I thought about the years ahead. More birthdays spent alone. More grandchildren's milestones missed. More family photos where my absence was so complete it was like I'd never existed at all. For the first time since my husband died 8 years ago, I felt truly orphaned. Not by death this time, but by something arguably worse. By the deliberate, methodical erasure of my place in the only family I had left. But as the anger built in my chest, hot and bright, I realized something else. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. If Meadow wanted to play games, she'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd raised Elliot when his father left us. I'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sacrificed my own dreams to ensure he had every opportunity. I'd earned my place in this family, and I wasn't giving it up without a fight. I just needed to figure out what I was really fighting against. It was Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after my abandoned birthday party, when the doorbell rang. I was still in my robe, nursing my second cup of coffee and staring at the stack of thank you cards I'd bought for a celebration that never happened. The sound startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and honestly, unexpected visitors had become rare in my carefully managed social isolation. Through the peephole I saw a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s maybe, with dark hair and worry lines etched deep around his eyes. He was well-dressed but rumpled, like he'd been traveling. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, and he kept glancing around nervously, as if he wasn't sure he should be there. I almost didn't answer. After the cruise incident, I wasn't in the mood for solicitors or missionaries or whatever this stranger might want. But something about his posture, the way he seemed to be gathering courage just to stand on my porch, made me curious. "Can I help you?" I called through the door. "Mrs. Patterson." His voice was careful, hesitant. "Loretta Patterson, Elliot's mother?" My chest tightened. How did this stranger know my son's name? "Who's asking?" He was quiet for a moment, then said something that made my blood run cold. "My name is David Chun. Need to talk to you about Meadow." I opened the door slowly, keeping the chain latched. "What about Meadow?" David Chun looked even more nervous up close. His hands were trembling slightly, and there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. "This is going to sound crazy, Mrs. Patterson, but I think my son might be living in your son's house." The chain felt suddenly heavy in my hands. "What are you talking about?" "Tommy," he said, and the name hit me like a physical blow. "The little boy, 7 years old, brown hair, has a scar on his chin from falling off his bike when he was 4. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Tommy did have a scar on his chin. Elliot had told me about the bike accident, how scared they'd all been rushing him to the emergency room. But how would this stranger know that? "I think you better come in," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. David Chun sat on my couch like he might bolt at any second. I offered him coffee, but he shook his head, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. "I don't know where to start," he said. "This is going to sound insane. Try me. I've had a very strange week." He took a shaky breath. "Meadow and we were together for 2 years. This was before she met your son, before she got married. We lived together, talked about marriage, the whole thing. And then she got pregnant. My coffee cup suddenly felt too heavy. I set it down carefully, afraid I might drop it. I was so happy, David continued, his voice thick with old pain. I wanted to marry her immediately, start planning our life together. But Meadow, she kept putting me off. Said she needed time to think, wasn't ready for such a big step. Then one day I came home from work and she was gone. Just gone. All her stuff, everything, like she'd never lived there at all. Did you look for her? Of course I did. For months. Filed a missing person report, hired a private investigator, posted on every social media platform I could think of. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. He rubbed his face with both hands. The investigator finally told me to give up. Said, some people just don't want to be found. I was starting to feel sick. What does this have to do with Tommy? 3 months ago, I was at a conference in Sacramento, just walking around downtown during lunch, and I saw them. Meadow and a little boy who looked exactly like me at that age. Same eyes, same chin, even the same way of tilting his head when he's concentrating. I followed them for 3 blocks. Mrs. Patterson, I watched that little boy and I knew he was mine. The room felt like it was spinning. You're saying Tommy is your son? I'm saying I think he is. Meadow was about 2 months pregnant when she left me. If she carried the baby to term, he'd be exactly Tommy's age now. David reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Look at this. He showed me a photo of himself as a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The resemblance to Tommy was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw, even the same slight gap between his front teeth that Tommy was always trying to hide when he smiled. My hands were shaking now. This could be a coincidence. Lots of children look alike. That's what I told myself at first. But then I started digging. David's voice got harder, more determined. I hired another investigator, a better one this time. Meadow Martinez? That's not even her real name, by the way. Her real name is Margaret Winters, and she's done this before. Done what before? Disappeared when things got complicated. Left men when they started asking too many questions. The investigator found 2 other guys, Mrs. Patterson. 2 other men who had relationships with her that ended the same way. Suddenly, completely, like she'd never existed. David leaned forward, his eyes intense. One of them thinks she might have been pregnant when she left him too. I felt like I was drowning. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because I've been watching from a distance for 3 months, trying to figure out what to do. Trying to decide if I had the right to disrupt a child's life based on suspicions and coincidences. His voice cracked. But then I saw the photos from your cruise, the happy family vacation. Everyone smiling and laughing. And I realized something that made me sick. What? You weren't in any of the photos. I looked through all of Meadow's social media. Mrs. Patterson, hundreds of pictures of family gatherings, birthday parties, holidays. Tommy and Emma are in all of them. Your son Elliot is in most of them. But you're barely there. Like you're being written out of your own family story. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all those missed events, all those last-minute changes and convenient miscommunications. All those times I'd felt like an outsider looking in at my own family. I started thinking about my own experience with Meadow, David continued. How she isolated me from my friends and family near the end. How she made me feel like I was the problem, like I was too demanding, too clingy. How she convinced me that the people who cared about me didn't really understand our relationship. She's doing the same thing to Elliot, I whispered. I think so. And I think she's doing it to you too. He looked at me, his gaze unwavering. Which means if Tommy really is my son, he's not the only victim here. You are too. David reached into his coat again and pulled out a manila envelope. This is why I'm here, Mrs. Patterson. Why I finally worked up the courage to knock on your door. What is it? DNA test results. I managed to get a sample of Tommy's hair from the barber shop where Meadow takes him. Had it tested against my own DNA. His hands were shaking as he handed me the envelope. I got the results yesterday. I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Inside was information that could destroy my family or save it. And I had no way of knowing which. Before you open that, David said quietly, I need you to know something else. I don't want to take Tommy away from the only father he's ever known. I don't want to traumatize him or disrupt his life. But I can't stand by and watch Meadow manipulate and lie to the people who love him. Including you. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me make sure he's protected from her. From whatever game she's been playing with all of us. David's voice was steady now, resolved. Because if she's lied about this, Mrs. Patterson, what else has she lied about? And who else is she going to hurt? I looked at the envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of whatever truth was inside. Outside, a car door slammed, and I heard children laughing as they walked past my house. Normal sounds of a normal afternoon in a normal neighborhood, where mothers didn't steal children and grandmothers didn't get erased from family photos. But my life hadn't been normal for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Mrs. Patterson, David's voice was gentle now, almost kind. Are you ready to know the truth? I thought about Tommy's sweet face. About the way he used to run to me with his arms outstretched before Meadow started discouraging those displays of affection. I thought about Emma, who barely knew me anymore because I'd been excluded from so much of her life. I thought about Elliot, my son, who'd been slowly poisoned against his own mother. I thought about my empty birthday party and all those family photos where I didn't exist. Yes, I said and opened the envelope. The DNA results were written in clinical, unforgiving language. 99.7% probability of paternity. The numbers swam before my eyes as I read them again and again, hoping somehow they'd change, hoping this was all an elaborate mistake or cruel joke. Tommy wasn't Elliot's son. My grandson, the little boy I'd watched take his first steps, helped teach to tie his shoes, read bedtime stories to when he was small enough to curl up in my lap. He wasn't my blood at all. And Elliot, my devoted son who'd named Tommy after his own grandfather, had no idea he'd been raising another man's child. I'm sorry, David said quietly. He was still sitting on my couch, watching my face as I processed the information. I know this must be devastating. I set the papers down with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. How long have you known for certain? Since yesterday. But I've suspected for months. He pulled out his phone again and showed me more photos. Surveillance pictures he'd obviously taken from a distance. Tommy playing at a park. Tommy walking into a school building. Tommy riding a bike down what looked like my neighborhood street. I've been following them sometimes. I know how that sounds, but I had to be sure. You've been watching my family. I've been watching my son, David corrected, his voice firm but not hostile, and trying to understand what kind of woman could steal a child and build an entire life around that lie. The anger came then, hot and overwhelming. Not at David. He was as much a victim as the rest of us. But at Meadow, at the magnitude of her deception, the cruelty of it. She hadn't just lied about Tommy's parentage. She built her entire marriage on that lie. Used an innocent child as the foundation for a life she had no right to claim. She trapped Elliot, I said, the words coming out harsh and bitter. She got pregnant with another man's baby, and used it to secure a marriage to my son. It looks that way. David's expression was grim. The timeline fits perfectly. She left me when she was about 2 months along, just starting to show. If she moved fast, found someone quickly, she could have convinced him the baby was premature or just small. I thought back to Tommy's birth. How excited Elliot had been when he called to tell me Meadow was in labor. He came 3 weeks early, I remembered. Elliot was worried about complications, but the doctor said everything was fine. Because everything was fine. Tommy wasn't premature. He was exactly on schedule for my timeline, not Elliot's. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Meadow's whirlwind romance with my son, the quick engagement, the wedding that happened barely 6 months after they met. I thought it was romantic at the time, true love conquering all. Now I realized it was something much more calculated. She needed a father for Tommy before he was born, I said. Someone stable, someone who wouldn't question the timing too closely, someone trusting, someone who wouldn't demand a paternity test because the thought would never occur to him, David added. That was Elliot exactly. My son had always been honest to a fault, incapable of the kind of deception that would make him suspicious of others. He took people at face value, believed what they told him. It was one of his best qualities, and Meadow had weaponized it against him. There's more, David said, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. The investigator I hired found out some other things about Meadow. Things that might explain why she's been pushing you out of the picture. What things? David pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were photographs, documents, what looked like copies of official records. Her real name is Margaret Winters. She's 34, not 31 like she told your son. She grew up in foster care. Aged out of the system at 18. No family, no real connections anywhere. I studied a photograph that looked like it came from a high school yearbook. The face was definitely Meadow, but younger, harder somehow. Her hair was different, darker. And there was something in her eyes that I'd never seen in the woman who married my son. A kind of desperate hunger. She's been married before, David continued, twice. Once to a man named Robert Kim in Nevada. Once to someone called James Fletcher in Oregon. Both marriages ended in divorce within 2 years. Both times with her getting significant alimony settlements. She's done this before, I whispered. The pattern was always the same. She meets a man with money or stability, moves fast to lock him down, then systematically isolates him from his support system. Friends, family, anyone who might see through her act or ask uncomfortable questions. I thought about how Elliot's college friends had gradually stopped coming around after he married Meadow. How he drifted away from his work colleagues. How he rarely talked about his job anymore except to mention how stressful it was. How he'd become increasingly dependent on Meadow for social connections, for emotional support, for everything. She's been isolating him, I said. And you because you're the biggest threat to her control. Mothers see things other people miss. They ask questions. They remember details from before she came along. David leaned forward, his expression intense. She needed you out of the picture, Mrs. Patterson. Not just distant, completely erased. That's why the birthday party sabotage. That's why all the missed events and miscommunications. She's been systematically training your family to function without you. The cruelty of it took my breath away. But why? If she already had Elliot. If he believed Tommy was his son, why go to such lengths to exclude me? Because you're a witness to the timeline. You remember when they met, when she got pregnant, when Tommy was born. If you'd ever started asking questions, comparing dates, you might have figured out the truth. David's voice was quiet but certain. She needed you to become irrelevant before you became dangerous. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where I could see the street where Tommy had learned to ride his bike. The little boy I cheered for. Bandaged his scraped knees, celebrated every milestone with. He was still the same child, still sweet and funny and bright. But everything about his place in our family was a lie. What about Emma? I asked, dreading the answer. As far as I can tell, Emma really is Elliot's daughter. Born 2 years after Tommy, during a time when Meadow and your son were definitely together. But Mrs. Patterson, David hesitated. What? Emma's birth might have been calculated too. A way to make sure Elliot never questioned Tommy's parentage. If Meadow could give him a biological child, he'd be less likely to doubt that Tommy was his too. And it would cement their relationship even further. I felt sick. Everything about my son's marriage, his family, his life for the past 7 years had been orchestrated by a woman who saw him not as a person to love, but as a resource to exploit. And she'd used children, innocent children, as tools in her manipulation. Tommy doesn't know, does he? I asked. Of course not. He's 7 years old. As far as he's concerned, Elliot is his father and always has been. And Emma, she doesn't know either. She just thinks she has a big brother who looks different from her. Kids don't question these things, but adults do. Or they should. And I was starting to understand why Meadow had worked so hard to make me irrelevant. A grandmother who spent time with her grandchildren, who was really present in their lives, might eventually notice that Tommy looked nothing like his supposed father. Might start asking questions about family resemblances, about genetic traits that didn't add up. David, I said slowly, why did you decide to tell me this now? You could have just demanded a paternity test, gone through the courts, tried to get custody. Why involve me? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Because I realized something when I saw those cruise photos. Meadow isn't just destroying my relationship with my son. She's destroying yours too. And if we don't stop her, she's going to keep doing it to other people. What do you mean? She's already starting to pull back from Elliot's friends, from his work colleagues, making him more and more dependent on her for everything. And she's teaching the kids to see him as the only parent who really matters. Tommy barely talks about you anymore when I've watched them at the park. It's like she's erasing you from his memory. The truth of that hit me like a physical blow. I thought about how different Tommy had become in recent months. How he'd stopped running to hug me when I visited. How he'd started looking to Meadow for permission before talking to me. I thought he was just growing up, becoming more independent. But maybe it was something else entirely. She's going to discard Elliot eventually, David continued. Just like she discarded me, just like she discarded her previous husbands. But first, she's going to make sure he has nothing left except her and the kids. No friends, no family, no support system. When she's ready to move on, he'll be completely alone. I closed my eyes, seeing my son's future stretched out before him. Isolated, abandoned, probably broke if Meadow was as calculating as she appeared to be. And the children caught in the middle of it all, used as pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. What do you want me to do? I asked. David stood up, gathering his papers and photos. I want you to help me save our family. Both of us. Because that's what we are, Mrs. Patterson. Family. You're Tommy's grandmother, in every way that matters, even if we don't share DNA. And I'm not going to let Meadow destroy that just because she's afraid of the truth. He handed me a business card with his contact information. Think about it, but don't think too long. They'll be back from their cruise in a few days. And when they are, Meadow's going to be watching for any sign that you're becoming a problem again. If we're going to act, it has to be soon. After David left, I sat in my living room holding the DNA results and staring at that business card. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, and the house felt quieter than ever. But for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the calm before a storm because Meadow Martinez, or Margaret Winters or whatever her real name was, had made a critical mistake. She thought she could erase me completely, make me irrelevant to my own family's story. But I wasn't gone yet. And now that I knew what she really was, I wasn't going anywhere. I called Elliot 3 days after the family returned from their cruise. My voice was steady, practiced. I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in my head. Hi, sweetheart. I was wondering if we could all get together for dinner this weekend. I have something important I'd like to discuss with you and Meadow. There was a pause on the other end. Is everything okay, Mom? You sound serious. Everything's fine. I just think it's time we had a real family conversation about us, about the future. I've been doing some thinking while you were away. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear Meadow's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. When Elliot came back on the line, his tone was more cautious. Meadow wants to know what kind of conversation. She's concerned that you might be upset about the cruise timing. Of course she was concerned. Meadow's instincts were sharp. She could probably sense that something had shifted even through the phone. Tell Meadow I'm not upset about anything. I just think it's important for families to communicate openly. Don't you? Saturday evening would be perfect. I'll cook. Let me check with Meadow and get back to you. The fact that my 38-year-old son needed to check with his wife about having dinner with his mother would have been laughable if it weren't so heartbreaking. But I kept my voice light. Of course. Let me know. He called back 2 hours later. Saturday works. 6 o'clock. Perfect. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. That was Thursday. I spent Friday preparing for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my life. David and I had met twice more since his first visit, planning carefully how to present the truth in a way that would protect Tommy while exposing Meadow's deception. The DNA results were safely tucked in a manila folder on my kitchen counter, along with copies of the documents David's investigator had found. Margaret Winters' real identity, her previous marriages, the timeline that proved Tommy couldn't be Elliot's biological son. Everything we needed to strip away the lies Meadow had built her life on. I made Elliot's favorite meal. Pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes and the green beans he'd loved since childhood. If this was going to be the last family dinner we ever shared, I wanted it to be memorable for the right reasons, at least initially. Saturday evening arrived, gray and drizzly. Typical October weather. I set the dining room table with my good china. The same dishes I'd planned to use for my birthday celebration 2 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. They arrived precisely at 6. Meadow was wearing a flowing cream-colored dress that made her look younger, more innocent. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like the picture of a devoted wife and mother, someone incapable of deception. Tommy bounded through the door first, all 7-year-old energy and excitement. Grandma Loretta, I learned to swim on the cruise. Want to see me do the doggy paddle? My heart clenched as I hugged him, knowing what I was about to reveal would change everything for this innocent child. Maybe after dinner, sweetheart. Go wash your hands. Emma followed more quietly, clutching a small doll with tangled hair. At 5, she was more reserved than her brother, more cautious around me since Meadow had started discouraging their affection. But she still let me kiss her forehead before following Tommy to the bathroom. Elliot hugged me warmly. Something smells incredible, Mom. I've missed your cooking. You look tired, I observed. He did. There were new lines around his eyes and he'd lost weight. Work's been brutal lately. The mergers got everyone stressed. He glanced at Meadow, who was examining my living room like she was cataloging potential problems. But Meadow keeps telling me I need to find a better work-life balance. Stress is so bad for your health, Meadow said, appearing beside us with that practiced smile. I keep encouraging Elliot to consider early retirement. We could travel more, spend more time with the children. Early retirement at 38? Another way to make Elliot completely dependent on her, cutting him off from his professional identity and income. I smiled back pleasantly. How wonderful that you're thinking about the future. That's actually related to what I wanted to discuss tonight. During dinner, I kept the conversation light. The children chattered about their cruise adventures, and Meadow played the perfect mother, cutting Tommy's meat and reminding Emma to use her napkin. She was good at this performance. Warm, attentive, completely believable. But I noticed things I'd missed before. How she interrupted when Tommy started telling a story about missing me while they were gone. How she redirected Emma's attention when the little girl asked why I hadn't come on the trip with them. How she subtly managed every interaction, controlling the flow of conversation and affection. After the children finished eating, I suggested they play in the living room while the adults talked. Meadow immediately objected. Oh, they should probably get ready to go soon. Tomorrow's a school day, and we like to keep their routine consistent. This won't take long, I said firmly. And I think what I have to share might affect their routine quite a bit. Something flickered across Meadow's face, just for a second, but I caught it. Fear. When the children were settled with their toys in the next room, I returned to the dining room where Elliot and Meadow waited. The manila folder sat on the table beside my coffee cup like a loaded weapon. So, Elliot said, reaching for Meadow's hand across the table. What did you want to talk about? I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I wanted to talk about honesty, about family, about the importance of knowing who we really are. Meadow's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. That's a little philosophical for dinner conversation. Is it? I don't think so. I picked up the manila folder, feeling both of them tense. You see, I've learned some interesting things recently. About family history, about genetics, about the importance of medical records and accurate information. Mom, Elliot said slowly. What's in the folder? The truth. I opened it and pulled out the DNA results, setting them on the table between us. These are the results of a paternity test for Tommy. The silence that followed was deafening. Elliot stared at the papers like they might burst into flames. Meadow went very still, her face carefully blank. A paternity test? Elliot's voice was barely a whisper. Why would you? How did you? The test shows that you are not Tommy's biological father, I said gently. There's a 99.7% probability that another man is his father. A man named David Chun. Meadow stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. Loretta, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but... Sit down, Margaret. The use of her real name hit like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward, her face going white. Elliot looked between us, confusion and growing horror warring in his expression. Margaret? Mom, what's going on? I pulled out the investigator's report, the marriage certificates, the timeline documentation. Meadow's real name is Margaret Winters. She's been married twice before, and she has a pattern of lying about her identity and her past. She was involved with David Chun before she met you, Elliot. She left him when she was pregnant with his child and came to find a new father for her baby. That's not true, Meadow said, but her voice was shaking now. Elliot, please don't listen to this. Your mother has obviously had some kind of breakdown. Tommy was born 7 months after you two met, I continued relentlessly. You thought he was premature, but he wasn't. He was born exactly on schedule for the timeline of Meadow's relationship with David. Elliot picked up the DNA results with hands that were trembling. I watched his face as he read them, watched the color drain from his cheeks as the numbers sank in. This can't be right, he whispered. David Chun has been looking for his son for 7 years, I said. He found you 3 months ago and has been watching from a distance, trying to decide what to do. He came to me because he recognized what Meadow was doing to our family. The same isolation tactic she used on him. Meadow was backing toward the doorway now, her perfect composure completely shattered. Elliot, please don't let her poison you against me. Think about our life together. Our family. Our family. Elliot's voice was raw, broken. Our family that's built on a lie? Our son who isn't actually our son. He is your son in every way that matters. You raised him. You love him. Based on a lie. Elliot slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. Everything, Meadow. Everything has been a lie. From the living room came the sound of children's laughter, innocent and bright. Tommy and Emma playing their games, unaware that their world was imploding in the next room. There's more, I said quietly, and pulled out the records of Meadow's previous marriages. She's done this before. Found men, married them quickly, isolated them from their families, then moved on when it suited her. You're not her first victim, Elliot. You're just the most successful one. Elliot stared at the documents, his breathing shallow and fast. The cruise, he said suddenly. Your birthday? That wasn't a coincidence, was it? Meadow said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. You planned it deliberately. You made sure Mom would be alone on her birthday while we were all together having fun without her. You wanted to hurt her. I wanted to protect our family. Meadow started. From what? Elliot demanded. From my mother? From the woman who raised me and loved me and would never hurt anyone. From someone who would eventually figure out the truth, I said softly. That's what this has all been about, Elliot. The missed events, the last-minute changes, the gradual separation from your friends and family. Meadow needed to isolate you completely before you started asking questions she couldn't answer. Elliot looked up at his wife. His wife who wasn't who she claimed to be, whose entire life with him was built on deception. Is any of it real? Do you love me at all? Or was I just convenient? For the first time since I'd known her, Meadow had no answer. No smooth deflection, no manipulation, no perfectly crafted response. She just stood there, exposed and silent. That silence told us everything we needed to know. From the living room, Tommy called out, "Daddy, can we have ice cream?" Elliot closed his eyes, and I saw a tear slip down his cheek. "What do I tell them?" he whispered. "How do I explain this to the children?" "We'll figure it out," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Together as a family. Tommy is still your son in every way that matters. That doesn't change. But he also has a biological father who loves him and wants to be part of his life. And maybe if we handle this right, that can be a good thing." Meadow turned toward the door, but I called after her. "Margaret." She stopped but didn't turn around. "David isn't going to disappear this time. And neither am I. If you try to run with the children, we'll find you. If you try to manipulate the situation or hurt these kids to protect yourself, we'll stop you. Your days of controlling this family are over." She walked out without another word, leaving behind the sound of children playing in the wreckage of 7 years of lies. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was losing my family. I felt like I was finally getting it back. 6 months later, I was in my kitchen making Sunday dinner when I heard the front door open and Tommy's voice calling out, "Grandma, we brought dessert." "In here, sweetheart," I called back, smiling as I heard the thunder of small feet running toward me. Tommy burst through the kitchen doorway, his arms wrapped around a bakery box that was almost too big for him to carry. Behind him came Emma, more careful with her steps, carrying a small bouquet of daisies. "These are for you," she said shyly, holding out the flowers. "Daddy said yellow is your favorite color." I knelt down to accept the bouquet, pulling her into a hug that she no longer hesitated to return. "They're perfect, sweetheart." "Thank you." Elliot appeared in the doorway, looking healthier than he had in years. The weight he'd lost during those final months with Meadow had returned, and the stress lines around his eyes had softened. Behind him stood David, still somewhat tentative in family gatherings, but gradually finding his place in our complicated new dynamic. "Something smells incredible," Elliot said, kissing my cheek. "Is that your famous apple pie?" "Tommy specifically requested it," I said, ruffling the little boy's hair. "Along with mashed potatoes and that chicken recipe you used to love, the one with the herbs." Tommy's eyes lit up. "Yes, that's my favorite too, just like Daddy's." The easy way he called both Elliot and David Daddy still took some getting used to, but the children had adapted to their expanded family with the resilience that kids possess. Tommy called Elliot Daddy and David Daddy Dave, while Emma had simply accepted that Tommy had 2 fathers the same way some of her friends had 2 houses. David set a bottle of wine on the counter, still moving carefully in what had once been Meadow's domain. "How can I help?" "You can set the table," I said. "The good china is in the dining room cabinet." It had taken months to reach this point. Months of family therapy, careful conversations with the children, and legal proceedings that finally ended with Meadow's voluntary relinquishment of custody, in exchange for avoiding prosecution for fraud. She disappeared again, just as she had from David's life 7 years ago. But this time she'd left the children behind. The transition hadn't been easy. Tommy had been confused and heartbroken by his mother's sudden absence. Despite all her manipulations, Emma had been clingy and anxious, afraid that more people she loved would disappear. There had been tears, tantrums, and sleepless nights for all of us. But there had also been healing. Elliot had moved back into the house he'd shared with Meadow, but everything felt different now. The oppressive atmosphere of secrets and walking on eggshells was gone. David had rented an apartment just 10 minutes away, close enough to be part of daily life, but far enough to give everyone space to adjust. "Grandma," Tommy said, tugging on my apron, "can I tell you a secret?" I knelt down to his level. "Of course you can." He cupped his hands around his mouth and whispered, "I'm glad you found Daddy Dave. Now I have the most daddies of anyone in my class." My heart squeezed with love for this resilient little boy who turned a complicated situation into a source of pride. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. And I'm glad Mommy Meadow went away," he added more quietly. "She was always mad about something." It broke my heart that a 7-year-old had been so aware of the tension in his household. But it also reassured me that we'd made the right choices. Children knew more than adults gave them credit for, and Tommy had sensed his mother's manipulation, even if he couldn't name it. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between the adults, while the children chattered about school and friends. David told us about Tommy's latest soccer game, where he'd scored his first goal. Elliot shared Emma's excitement about starting dance classes. We talked like the family we'd become, unconventional maybe, but real in a way that Meadow's carefully orchestrated version had never been. "I got a call from my lawyer yesterday," Elliot said as we cleared the dinner plates. "The divorce is finally final. How do you feel about that?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy help David load the dishwasher. Relieved mostly, and grateful that it's over without more damage to the kids. "Any regrets about ending the marriage?" "No. About not seeing the truth sooner." He shrugged. "I think I'll always regret that. How much time we lost, how much pain she caused you especially." I squeezed his shoulder. "You can't blame yourself for trusting someone you loved. That's not a character flaw, Elliot. That's just being human." David joined us at the counter, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Has there been any word from her?" "Nothing," Elliot said. "Her lawyer said she doesn't want any contact with the children. No visitation, no phone calls, nothing." "That's probably for the best," I said. Though it still amazed me that any mother could walk away so completely from her children. At least this way, the kids can heal without worrying about when she might disrupt their lives again. Later, after the children had fallen asleep watching a movie in the living room, the three adults sat around my kitchen table with coffee and leftover pie. These had become some of my favorite moments. Quiet conversations in the evening light, planning for the future, talking through the challenges of co-parenting in such an unusual situation. "I've been thinking about something," David said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "About Tommy's last name." Elliot looked up sharply. "What about it?" "He's been Patterson his whole life. That's his identity, his school records, everything. I don't want to change that, but I was wondering." David hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would it be okay if I took your name too? Officially. I mean David Patterson Chun. So Tommy and I would share part of a name, but he'd still be connected to you and your family history." The gesture was so thoughtful, so carefully designed to honor everyone's place in Tommy's life that I felt tears prick my eyes. Elliot looked stunned. "You do that?" "I want Tommy to know that families can be complicated without being broken," David said. "I want him to understand that loving someone doesn't mean you have to choose sides, or pretend other relationships don't matter." Elliot reached across the table and shook David's hand. "I think that's perfect." As the evening wound down and David prepared to take the children to his apartment for their weekly overnight stay, I pulled him aside. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For saving my family. For having the courage to tell me the truth when it would have been easier to just disappear again." David was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy gather his backpack and favorite stuffed animal. "You know what I realized that day I came to your door? I wasn't just losing my son. You were losing your family too. Meadow was taking all of us away from each other piece by piece. But we stopped her." "We did." He smiled. And for the first time since I'd met him, it reached his eyes completely. "And look what we built instead." I looked around my house at the children's artwork taped to the refrigerator, at Emma's forgotten sweater draped over a chair, at the family photos that now included David and truly reflected our reality. It wasn't the family I'd imagined when Elliot first got married, but it was infinitely better than the hollow performance Meadow had orchestrated. After everyone left, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating birthday 6 months ago. The empty house that had felt like a tomb now hummed with the echoes of family life. Children's laughter. David's careful questions about family traditions. Elliot's relieved conversations about his future plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. The kids are asking if we can do this every Sunday." I told them that was up to Grandma. I typed back, "Every Sunday sounds perfect. This is what families do." His response came quickly. "Yes, this is what real families do." I set the phone aside and looked at the framed photo on my side table, a picture from last month's trip to the zoo. All 5 of us crowded together in front of the elephant enclosure. Tommy was perched on David's shoulders while Emma held tight to my hand. Elliot stood in the middle, one arm around me and the other around David, grinning like he just remembered what happiness felt like. We looked like what we were. A family that had been broken apart and put back together in a new configuration. Stronger and more honest than before. Not conventional but real. Not perfect but true. The house settled around me as night fell, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of possibilities. Full of the love that Meadow had tried so hard to destroy, but had never quite managed to extinguish. I thought my 65th birthday had marked the end of my relevance to my family's story. Instead, it had marked the beginning of a new chapter. One where love wasn't conditional, where truth mattered more than appearance, and where being a grandmother meant protecting your grandchildren from anyone who would use them as weapons, even their own mother. Tomorrow was Monday, which meant Tommy had soccer practice and Emma had her dance class. David would pick up Tommy while Elliot took Emma, and they'd both end up back here for homework and dinner. It was the kind of routine that Meadow would have controlled and manipulated, but that now flowed naturally from our genuine care for each other. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I thought about the woman who tried to erase me from my own family's life. Somewhere out there, Meadow was probably spinning a new identity, crafting a new story, looking for a new family to infiltrate and control. But she'd left something behind that she'd never be able to replace. The love between people who chose to fight for each other instead of giving up. She taught us all what we didn't want to be. And in doing so, she'd helped us become exactly who we were meant to be. For that, if nothing else, I suppose I owed her a twisted kind of gratitude. But mostly I just felt sorry for her. She'd had a real family within her grasp, flawed and complicated but genuine. And she'd thrown it away for the hollow satisfaction of control. Her loss, our gain. And finally, after months of feeling like a ghost in my own life, I was home.